It's so weird. My whole life, before even knowing him, or even knowing that he existed, I've wanted to know him. I've wanted to learn and to grow in Christ. I've always felt his presence, and now I can look back through all of those things that happened in my life, and I can see him there. I was born in Georgia, so I was raised a lot in Georgia, Tennessee area. And my earliest, fondest memories, I was about 3 years old, and we lived in this trailer. It wasn't that far off the road. There was this preacher guy that would come down the road, and as he would get close to my house, he would throw out the window these little books that almost looked like little comic books of the Bible, and candies, and he'd throw them out to me every Sunday, and I loved it. For some reason, I really liked those books, and I wanted to know those stories. And I would watch him. He'd drive down just a little ways, and he'd pull into this parking lot, and there was always like laughter and stuff coming from that parking lot. And this particular time, my mom was out in the yard with me, and I asked her what that was, and she said it was a church. And I asked her, what was church? And she said, it's a place where they learn about Jesus. And I asked her if I could go. She told me no, that it would be boring, that I wouldn't understand. And I remember, even though I was so little, I was thinking, how could that be boring? They're laughing. I wanted that. I wanted to be there. I wanted to see what was so fun and what was so funny. Very short time later, we moved, so I no longer got to collect my little books. That's when things started changing. My dad no longer just drank himself to sleep anymore. Now, whenever he would drink, he would want to fight. It kind of became a daily occurrence with him and my mom, fighting all the time. I mean, brutal fights. My mom had many, many broken bones from my dad. She has lots of scars on her body from him. So as it got close to time for Dad to come home, I'd find myself gravitating toward my sisters and brothers. And I would go to the bedroom, and I would trot in there and put them in the closet. And we would sit there all hugged up in the closet until all the commotion, long after all the commotion. It was kind of like an everyday thing for them. They fought all the time, and we were all the time hiding from them. My sisters and brothers were scared of him, but I loved him. My morning dad was a lot of fun. He gave me piggyback rides and would sing to me and play with me. It was just my evening dad. My evening dad wasn't fun. Finally, she decided to leave him. We stayed with some of her distant relatives that I had never met. And I remember her aunt had a grown-up daughter who was married. She was married to a police officer. This guy took a fondness to me. It got to where, like, he was over all the time just to see me, and it would make me really, really uncomfortable. I remember one time he came over, he asked to take me for a ride. And my aunt made the mistake of saying that he could keep me as long as I wanted because my mom wouldn't be home until the next day. He got what he wanted. I was afraid to tell anybody, so I didn't. My mom found out, though. She needed to get us away from there, and she moved us back to Georgia. Mom enrolled me into school there, but I was hardly ever there. And so the state came and stepped in, and Mom agreed to do a voluntary foster care placement. There was 4 of us kids at that time. Just as we were pulling in the driveway to the first foster home, I remember her looking at me in the rearview mirror, and she goes, "Flonnie, I'm sorry, that this home can't take all of you. I was only 7, but I felt like they were my babies, like I was leaving my babies. And then she told me that not to worry, that the families were good Christian families. And I remember being like, what's Christian? Christian means they go to church and they learn about God. And when she said church, I was like, church? So I remember being happy then, but still sad that we couldn't be together. 2 years went by. I was coming out for recess, and I seen a line of kids getting ready to go in, and there was my baby brother. I just took off running to him, and I was hugging him, and I had so many questions for him, and I was wondering how Marianne was doing and stuff, and then the teacher kept trying to pull him away from me and put him back in line so they could go back in the class, and I hadn't seen him in a couple years, so I wanted to keep him. We were in those homes for close to 5 years before going home. It like changed. Then I would cry myself to sleep every night because I missed my foster parents. In the foster home, I was allowed to play sports. I was allowed to go to church. I learned about God. I went to Christian camp. I learned about prayer. So I asked my mom again if we could go to church, and she said no. I said, well, can we go to church if I get the ride myself? And she said, okay, thinking that I wouldn't be able to get a ride because everybody that lived there was family, and they wouldn't give me a ride. So instead I turned to the phone book and I started calling all the churches. I just went down the line and I was calling, asking them if they had a church bus. Everyone said no, no, no. And I got to the last phone call and I asked him, I said, do you have a church bus? And he's like, no, we don't have a church bus, but I'm the preacher here. And he goes, my wife and I have a small car, but if you guys will be willing to sit in each other's lap, we'll come and give you a ride. So I was excited. I was like, yay, they're finally going to learn about God. They'll live better, you know. I was excited. So that Sunday morning, I was getting ready. I gave him my address. He told me what time to be ready, and he pulls in. And my mom, she goes out there. She starts yelling at him and told him to leave and never come back. I was like, God, I don't get it. I arranged my own ride. Why can't I go to church? I remember sitting out on the porch and praying and saying, God, I know I'm only 14, but a life of my own's got to be better than this. I asked him to forgive me, and I ran away. I stayed different places. I hooked up with the guy that he kind of liked me. It was probably more like 3 days later, I got word that my mom was scared to death. She didn't know if I was alive or dead, and she was just worried about me. She just needed to hear from me and know that I was okay. And I remember thinking, what am I doing? So I asked him if he'd give me a ride back home, that I messed up, that I can't do that to her. He told me that he would give me a ride if I would be willing to do something else with him. And I remember her like 3 times telling him, I'm only 14. He kept on, and he told me, he said, I promise I'll give you a ride afterwards. So I did. And I remember after feeling so incredibly ashamed. Shortly after that, I found out I was pregnant. Thinking, how can this be? I'm just a baby. This isn't the way my life's supposed to be. I remember finally getting the nerve to talk to my mom and tell her what happened. And she asked me to have an abortion. I knew I couldn't have an abortion. So I decided that I was going to give the baby up for an adoption. And I was like, what if the home that I put her in What if they drink? What if they scare her? What if they hurt her? I had to know that she was going to be okay. I couldn't give her away. So I remember holding her in the hospital room, asking God to please help me figure out a way to keep her. I kind of moved around a lot with her, ever who would let me stay with the baby. I worked at McDonald's. I remember my manager, he knew I wasn't old enough to work there. So he came to me and he told me that he changed my birth date on my application. And he told me, if anybody asks, this is really when you were born. And I remember thinking, but that's a lie. We were kind of starting to see each other and date on and off, and so he offered to let me and my baby come and stay with him, at least until I could figure things out. So I did. We ended up getting pretty close. He was really good with my daughter. So by the time I was 18, we were married, him and I'd had another baby girl. I worked on getting my GED. It was really hard because my level of education was only 7th grade. Once I got my GED, I had another baby girl. About that time, I started examining my marriage. It was rocky. It was rocky from the beginning. He just liked to party. He drank so much. He liked the pretty girls. I thought I could change him. We would be really hot going to church, and then we wouldn't. Then we would, then we wouldn't. Tried to start being more fun, but it still wasn't enough. I still wasn't enough. I didn't know if divorce was accepted. I didn't know if God would allow me to get a divorce. I told him, I said, I will give you 1 year to decide what you want. It was a hard year because he wouldn't help me and I didn't make that much, so it was very, very difficult. So I took that year to pray and examine on my own, to ask for God's guidance and forgiveness. But then I saw he wasn't changing. So I asked God to help me and to give me strength. And 1 year later, I went to the courthouse to file for my divorce. It's so funny. That's the day I met my husband. That's the day I met Mark. He was an officer with court security there, and he was going through the same thing, kind of similar story. We just started talking, and it was just one thing after another. You know, during that year, I remember praying to God, why can't I have somebody in my life that wants to seek Him? Because I knew if I had someone in my life that loved God and wanted to have a relationship with God, they're going to love me. They're going to treat me good. My first date with Mark was him inviting me to church. I knew then, I was like, this is my man. We've had 2 more boys. So together we have 6 kids, 3 girls, 3 boys, 5 grandkids. Life is good. This year will be 16 years that Mark and I have been married, and it's been awesome. It's been great. 2 summers ago, my mom and I were able to find each other and make a relationship. We both realized life's too short. We need to forgive and forget and move on. She's not drinking anymore. She's a good lady now. She's sweet. And now we call each other on the phone. We have a good relationship now. Mark and I have been coming here roughly since about 2011. This is the first church that I've ever went to that I understood what a church family means. I honestly feel like I'm part of a church family. It's not just coming to church and going home and going back to my normal life when I'm at home. I mean, Mark and I, we try to get involved in as much as we can. And for years, I wouldn't tell anybody my story, not anything. But here, I feel safe. Pastor is always preaching, don't let your past define you. You know, you're bigger than that. So I believe that. I don't understand all of the reasonings for everything that's happened in my life. and I know that God has a purpose for it all. My road might have been rocky at times, but it's all good now. And I can look back and every bit of it, and I can see God there. I can see God opening doors for me, even before I knew Him, all the way back to when He was trying to introduce Himself to me with those little books that come flying out the window to me. God's always been there, and I thank Him for that. And I know some of my times was really hard and rocky, but it made me who I am today. I love myself. I love my family. I love my kids. I love my life. I wouldn't be me without it. My name is Buway, and this is my story.